Thank you, Mayor Watson. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le maire. On va maintenant commencer la période des questions avec une question, un suivi. CBC.
Hi, Prime Minister. Hannah Thibodeau from CBC National News. Hope you are well. The Kootenay chief has compared residential schools to Nazi war crimes. Is there a role for the Justice Department in ensuring people who ran these residential schools to be criminally prosecuted? I want to get a response on that, but I also want to tell you exactly what the Kootenay chief said so you know exactly. The Nazis were held accountable for their war crimes. I see no difference in locating the priests and nuns and brothers that are responsible for this mass murder for their part in their attempt of genocide on Indigenous people.
I think there's no question that this terrible and shameful part of our history was not done by any one person. It was a combination of institutions, of organizations, of governments, of individuals within those institutions and governments. And it's something that we recognize with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a country. We needed to get answers to. We needed to share the truth and talk about reconciliation and move forward on reconciliation. But the healing of the damages, of the intergenerational trauma, of the impact of decades of institutional enforced assimilation, of ripping kids from their families, from their cultures, from their language, and submitting them to all too often horrific situations and circumstances is something for which we all have to reflect on our collective responsibility as we look to the past, but also look to today and the very real impacts that those actions of decades past have on people's lives today and on the future that we're building as a country. It's not simply about looking back and highlighting and underlining and condemning actions of the past. It's also about taking a hard look at ourselves as a country right now. The institutional intolerance, discrimination, and racism that continues. The challenges we continue to face together, and the particular challenges that Indigenous Canadians, but also racialized Canadians, and Canadians from marginalized groups and communities continue to face in this, one of the very best countries in the world. And governments have the role to play, and the Justice Department no doubt will have its role to play as well, and accountability needs to be moved forward. But I think the moment we have tomorrow on Canada Day to have real conversations with our loved ones, with our neighbors, with our friends, about what each of us can do to stand as allies to Indigenous people, to shift our own mindsets, behaviors, and supports, is what this is all about. We need to be there as partners and friends to Indigenous Canadians who have suffered for decades, who are suffering greatly with the terrible revelations of the past weeks, and we need to pledge ourselves every single day to do better. Je pense que la réflexion que nous devons avoir, c'est que ces événements horribles de notre passé, d'avoir enlevé des enfants de leur communauté, de leur famille, de leur langue, de leur culture, de les avoir soumis à des abus et de la négligence. Ça fait partie de notre responsabilité pour le passé, mais c'est aussi une responsabilité présente que nous avons tous en tant que Canadiens. Parce que les institutions, les façons de penser, l'intolérance, la discrimination, et oui, le racisme, demeurent encore aujourd'hui envers les peuples autochtones, envers les Canadiens racisés, envers les minorités défavorisées. Et cette fête du Canada, demain, ça va être extrêmement important d'avoir des réflexions ensemble sur les responsabilités que nous avions tous. Oui, les institutions, les organismes, le département de la justice aussi, on a des réflexions à avoir là-dessus et de voir comment on peut assurer des conséquences, oui, mais surtout des actions concrètes qui vont mettre fin à ces traumatismes intergénérationnels, qui vont aider les gens à passer au-delà de cette réalité. Et oui, cette annonce d'aujourd'hui, qu'on est en train de faire à travers le pays pour améliorer l'accès au logement pour les personnes vulnérables, ça fait partie de la solution. Mais ce n'est pas juste aux institutions et au gouvernement d'agir, c'est aussi aux Canadiens, aux individus. Dans les conversations que les gens vont avoir, comme moi je suis en train d'avoir avec mes enfants. Mon fils Xavier qui m'a demandé aujourd'hui, est-ce qu'on annule la fête du Canada demain à cause des écoles résidentielles? C'est des conversations que nous devons avoir pour comprendre la peine, la douleur et le moment de respecter cette douleur des autres qui va faire partie, oui, de nos célébrations qu'on va avoir demain, qui seront différentes certainement. C'est un moment de réflexion sur tout le chemin qu'on a parcouru, mais aussi sur tout le chemin qui nous reste à parcourir.
Do you mind just saying that part about how you had the discussion with your children as well in English?
I think one of the things that is going to be a characteristic of this Canada Day is a lot of conversations that people are going to be having with their friends, with their colleagues, with their loved ones, and with their kids. I got a text this morning from Xavier. I'm just coming out of quarantine. I haven't seen them yet in 2 weeks, so you'll forgive me for being a little bit shaky, and I'm so eager to see them. But Zav asked me if we were going to cancel Canada Day because of the residential schools. And I told him it's going to be a day where, yes, we will celebrate the great things about this country, but we will mostly reflect on the work that we all have to do as individuals and as institutions to be better, to be more like the country we like to imagine we are. As we celebrate, whether it's Stanley Cup victories, fingers crossed, or Olympic gold medal victories, or Canada Days, or other events that make us proud to be Canadians, we have to know that not everyone is going to be celebrating tomorrow, and understanding their pain and their anger, and reflecting on that and thinking about how each of us can commit ourselves, not just by voting for a government that's willing to do it, but each of us in our daily lives can say, this is part of my problem too, my responsibility too, as a Canadian, to think about how I can bend this curve towards justice, towards reconciliation. That's what this Canada Day, I think, will be about for a lot of families. It's certainly what it's going to be about for my family.
Thank you for repeating that, sir. Indigenous leaders, as you well know, are planning a trip to the Vatican in December to try to convince the Pope to come on Canadian ground and apologize. How meaningful would that apology be if there is no further action from the Church?
I think the Catholic Church is in the midst of serious reflections on how it needs to move forward, how it needs to respond to not just the Indigenous people who have questions and reflections, but for Indigenous Catholics and indeed non-Indigenous Catholics across the country, like me, who are wondering and hoping that our church is going to step up and recognize its role, its responsibility, and its continued need to do more. That's what people are expecting. I think it is a good piece of news that there are going to be meetings with Indigenous leaders with His Holiness. There have been meetings in the past with popes. I really hope that this time it will lead towards the Pope coming onto Canadian soil and apologizing directly for the responsibility that the Catholic Church shares in this part of our history. Okay. Je pense que évidemment c'est une bonne chose que l'Église catholique et le pape va rencontrer des survivants, des leaders autochtones. Il y a déjà eu des rencontres. On a besoin d'en avoir d'autres, mais on a surtout besoin d'avoir le pape venir au Canada pour s'excuser directement auprès des peuples autochtones pour ses erreurs du passé et prendre responsabilité pour la guérison et l'appui nécessaire.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre, Catherine Lévesque de la Presse canadienne. Vous avez mentionné les Habs tantôt. D'ailleurs, on ne sait toujours pas est-ce que vous avez parié avec Joe Biden, mais ce n'est pas ma première question. Je voulais revenir sur le bilan législatif. Vous avez parlé de la loi sur le climat qui a été adoptée. Par contre, il y en a 2 autres sur la radiodiffusion, mais aussi sur l'interdiction des thérapies de conversion qui n'ont pas été adoptées par le Sénat avant de partir pour l'été. Je voulais avoir votre réaction là-dessus et savoir si vous avez demandé au Sénat de siéger cet été.
Effectivement, on a pu passer des projets de loi importants